So we are roughly halfway through the year, and I thought it was the perfect time to take a step back and talk about some of the best horror and thriller books I've read so far this year. This video is going to cover backlist titles, meaning books published before 2024. I'll do a separate video talking about new releases, but these books, while some of them are older, some of them newer, all of them deserve some love. This has turned into a great year so far of really reigniting my love for dark fiction, reading the good stuff, letting the other books go, and I'm here to share my favorites with you today. If that sounds good, let's get started. So let's attempt to rank these. Starting in the number 10 spot, we have Cujo by Stephen King, the classic book of Cujo and the family. And this is one, again, I went into really blind with low expectations, just the fact that I struggle with Stephen King sometimes. And man, this is a book that reminds me why I keep going back to this author, because while he's not always a 4 and 5 star read author for me, sometimes he just hits it just right. And this is the case here. I enjoyed this one. It was that right balance of nostalgia, interesting characters, and of course had a good creepiness, the unsettlingness of the town. And overall, I found myself really immersed in the story. I thought it had a great start, a really compelling prologue. I don't normally love prologues, but this one just really pulled me in. And it does help that I read this one as audio. Sometimes an audiobook narration can enhance the experience, and that was definitely the case here. I'm not familiar with who this narrator was, but her voice sounded familiar to that of Kate Mulgrew, so it kind of gave me vibes of Nosferatu by Joe Hill, of course, his son. And I really could see some of those comparisons they make between the father and son duo here. And again, it just gave me a feeling. It's so hard to really describe on camera what I love so much about this, but it was just kind of the familiar horror book narrative that I was looking for. I've never read this one before, but it felt like I had in a good way. It felt very comforting to read, even though it has some quite horrifying moments. And if anything, this book might even rise towards the end of the year, depending on how it sits in my memory. But so far, I'm going to put it here at number 10. And I definitely recommend it. It's perhaps not the best place to start with Stephen King, but it certainly is a place to start. And I'm glad it worked for me. Next up is Battle Royale, another book I just finished and reviewed on my channel, so I'll keep it brief. Of course, this is the story of a class that has to fight to the death in order to survive. It's a story that has been the inspiration for so much media that's come afterwards, but I'm happy to say that the original material really works. I think for me, it's the fact that the character work focusing on each of these individuals, each of these young teenagers, is well done. I really cared for them. I thought they had interesting backstories along the way, and found the story, despite seeming like it was going to be horribly repetitive, somehow worked really well despite the length of the book. I flew through it. It was gory and action-packed, not normally things that I would think of myself loving in my horror stories, just that they're not typically the elements that draw me in. But this book really works and just feels really special. I would love to read more translated Japanese work, and so hopefully I will do that this year. If you have any recommendations, let me know down below. Next is another surprise, and that is Carrion Comfort by Dan Simmons. This is a piece of epic horror by a beloved author. I've read several of his books before. I've read both his science fiction like Hyperion as well as other horror books like The Terror, and I tend to like his books but not necessarily love them. This one was a 4-star read for me, and I was pleasantly surprised. It has a historical element focusing around World War II and the Nazis, and also has a vampire element. And so with all the elements of the plot that I was aware of going into this one, I just didn't think it would necessarily be for me. But it ended up working out really well. I became completely immersed in the story. Again, it's a really long book, but it's one of those ones where I was happy it was long because I just wanted to spend time with the characters in the book and follow along. It's not necessarily the most memorable book on the list for me, but I remember the feeling I had reading it, and that is what holds it to the place of number 8. And I do recommend it if you're looking for a good place to start with Dan Simmons horror and you're a little bit intimidated by The Terror. I think this is an excellent alternative. Next, we have Moon Lake by Joe Lansdale, and this is another book that I recently read and reviewed, so I'll keep it quick. It's a coming-of-age story with some light mystery elements to it. We follow a young man who, as a child, his mother left his family, and his father had a lot of difficulty dealing with the situation, ended up trying to end his own life and take his son with him for that. Of course, the boy survived, and now we're following him as a young adult. He returns back to his hometown to revisit everything that happened and try to make sense of the horror of his past. This is one that I would recommend to anyone who loves coming of age narratives as much as I've grown to love. This one just hits a spot. It's nostalgic, but not overly so. It has great writing, and really it's a story you read for the characters. I said in my review that there is a little bit of a mystery or twist to the story, but it's not the reason to read it. You will likely see it come from a mile away, and I don't think that that really is dependent on your enjoyment of the book. Instead, you just want to enjoy the book for the ride it is. Spend time. It's slower paced. It's just very brooding and quiet in a really good way. It's very much reflective, as are the best coming of age stories. So highly recommend this one. This one is going to stay with me for quite a while. Then at number 6, we have Apparitions by Adam Pottle, a book that just came out last year, so it's barely backlist, but I'm counting it here. This one follows a young boy, a young teenager who escapes from his father. He was basically held captive as a boy, and he escapes and is running through the Canadian prairies. He ends up coming across another deaf boy, and they form a bit of a friendship, a connection, and the story goes on from there. This one is very character heavy. It certainly has the backstory of this exciting thriller narrative. I'm always a sucker for a kidnapping story, and so those parts certainly appeal to me. But really at its core, this is a book about a boy who's coming into his own, trying to find himself and understand the world that is otherwise being cut off from him. This is one I recommend to those of you that love Room by Emma Donoghue, because it has kind of that similar thing with an innocent character who has to figure it out after a kidnapping has occurred. And so this one just, again, has really great character work, really interesting and fascinating representation of the deaf community, something that I'm always looking to read more about. And I just think, again, it has these good thrillery elements, piecing it all together. If you're someone who loves a bit of different formatting in your novels, so this does have kind of some letters and diary entries, things like that, meshed into it, I think that this book has a lot of appeal to a lot of people, and in my opinion is underhyped. So I'm looking to change that. I do recommend this one. If you're looking for something that's a little bit less known, but definitely worth your time, this is the recommendation here. And then breaking into the number 5 spot, we have Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood. Yes, I couldn't get through a video without recommending one of my favorite Canadian authors. And this is one that I don't hear about a lot online compared to some of the other books. This one really is more just kind of dark literary fiction, doesn't necessarily have the thriller and horror elements of some of the other books I'm mentioning here, but I'm gonna squish it into this video because I love it a lot, and I do think that it will appeal to some similar readers who love the darker fiction on more, again, that literary end. And so in this one, we follow this woman who's returning back to Toronto. She is an artist, and she is reminiscing about her childhood. There was a trio of 3 girls, and together they were this really tight but perhaps toxic female friend group, and you get to see that played out. So this book is very surreal. It kind of shifts over time. It follows them, and it's probably not my favorite Margaret Atwood book. It's probably not where I'd recommend to start, because I do think there's stronger, more straightforward narratives that she's written that do have a lot more cross appeal. Handmaid's Tale, I'm looking at you. But if you just want to read more by this author, this is one, again, that I don't hear enough other people recommending, and I do think holds up. I am someone who is a sucker for any narrative that deals with toxic female friendship, which is very much core in this story. And again, it's somewhat of an older book. I feel like that theme or trope has become very popular in the post Mean Girls era, but this is a book that was doing it long before then and really explored those ideas before it became trendy. And I think she does a great job. She just writes really good characters. Her writing is beautiful. It just clicks for me. I promise it's not just because I'm Canadian. It honestly just works well with my brain. And so I do recommend, if you're a Margaret Atwood fan and you haven't read this one yet, please change it. It's definitely worth your time. Then at number 4, we have Bloom by Delilah Dawson. This is a short horror novella that follows a woman who meets another woman at the farmer's market. In between artisanal soaps and fancy wax candles, they meet, and this woman is immediately attracted to this other woman. So this does have an element of a sapphic romance to it. However, it's more of a horror story or thriller aspect to it, where that interest becomes obsession, and we spiral as the story goes on from there. And so once again, I love, whether it be female friendships or female romantic relationships, that toxicity, that obsession. I love playing around with the intensity that comes with female relationships in general, which I think is perfectly highlighted here. And strangely, a lot of this book, as I mentioned, is kind of set around this farmer's market and this lifestyle. So I know that there is a huge aesthetic that's becoming very popular that admittedly you don't see on my channel, but is something I'm really attracted to, is like cottagecore. And so this feels like the the horror version of a cottagecore story. So if you're looking for something like this, it's so special, it's so unique, it's playing around with things that are very popular and trendy right now and turning it into this little twisty book in a way that felt very satisfying. I thought the writing was beautiful. It's one of these times where I was reading a book from the library but regretted not having my own copy because I wanted to be able to highlight things and quote them and all of that. And so I do recommend this one. I thought it was a pretty special book, and I think that a lot of you will enjoy it too. And then at number 3, we have The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which is more literary fiction rather than a traditional thriller, but I think it will appeal to the same audience if you're someone who loves mysteries and thrillers because of really intricate character work. If you love those deep character studies along the way, I think that this one will appeal to you. It's one I've had my eye on for so long, and I finally pulled the trigger and set aside time for this chunky book. It's a longer read. It's again much more slow paced. It doesn't really have the narrative drive that you're used to if you read a lot of more modern thrillers, but instead this one is a great setup. If you don't know, it follows a group of college students that right in the first page, not a spoiler, they let you know that they've killed a character named Bunny, and then the rest of the book is following them in the past leading up to that event and showing you what happened along the way. It deals with very privileged college students. All the characters are relatively unlikable. They're kind of have a lot of advantages that are given to them, and you just kind of watch them stumble through university and all those things along the way. It's a book that almost shouldn't work but works so well. I can see the appeal to it. Again, a book with a lot of hype. Sometimes it doesn't work as well for me because it can be just overhyped and not live up to those expectations, but it completely did. It's great if you enjoy good prose, great character work, and a little bit of mystery of how we got to that hot mess of an ending that started at the beginning. It's a good book to pick up. Then at number 2, we have Night's Edge by Liz Kiernan, and this is the first book in a series that I describe as slice of life vampire fiction. It is very gritty and character focused. It's slow burning, and it just has an atmosphere to it. And again, I'm finding myself, as you can see with this list of books, drawn to a different type of dark fiction this year, and I'm really just leaning into it. I'm not apologizing that perhaps I'm going on different paths and rabbit holes and all of that, and just enjoying what I'm reading and not worrying about if it's going to work for anyone else because these books work for me. So I very much understand this book is going to be more slow paced than other readers are looking for. It deals with the darkness of vampires, but again, it almost feels like reading a copy of a visual novel. So if you love those type of video games and just want to kind of spend time as a vampire trying to survive in a city, trying to deal with their dysfunctional family and backstory and all of that, this is the kind of book that I really enjoyed reading. I thought the prose were beautiful, the character work was interesting. There was a second book which came out this year, but this book alone as a backlist title is so worth your time. I regret missing it last year, and I'm so happy I got a chance to read it now. And at the number 1 spot, a book that I cannot stop thinking about this year is Rainbirds. And this is a mystery thriller type literary fiction story that follows a brother and sister. So the story particularly is told from the perspective of this young man who has an older sister. She has been away living in this smaller Japanese town. He gets notice from the police authorities that she has died, and so they're asking him to help them try to piece together what happened. He is in contact or has been in contact with his sister, but they didn't necessarily always talk about the big stuff, and so he realizes he doesn't know as much about her life as he thought he did. He ends up going to that town and trying to meet the people that she was spending time with and piece everything together to try to get some answers. You find out very early in the book that this brother and sister have a strong familiar connection. They really grew up having this great bond because of the fact that their parents were quite absent. The older sister ended up doing all the cooking because the mother wasn't really there, and because of that they felt extremely close as kids. But as often happens in those kind of post high school years, especially when someone moves away, is they did just shift apart. They didn't necessarily again talk about deep things, their emotions, and now he's having to deal with the aftermath of not really knowing what happened to his sister and really not knowing what she was doing even before this incident occurred. So clearly there is a mystery aspect to the story, but I'll be honest, it's very much in the background. And if you're someone who is looking for a big whodunit, you want to piece everything together, talk to characters, and be a armchair detective, this book will probably be unsatisfying because really the mystery, you almost could forget about who was behind it it all, because it's so much more about just studying this young woman as an individual and more so about that sister and brother bond, which I found to be more compelling than the mystery itself. Not that the mystery is bad, it's just more so the setup to the story rather than the destination. And so if you're looking for a book, again, with beautiful prose, amazing character work, just a beautiful setting. I love the Japanese small town setting. I'm really entranced by the country of Japan, and so getting to spend time with the character there just felt very familiar. This book had a very slice of life feel to it. It kind of felt like the kind of book that could be easily turned into a visual video game novel where you would kind of have a point and click and follow the characters around, because you kind of talk to characters, you look at her old stuff, and you're just piecing things together. But again, it's very slow paced, very relaxed in the way it's presented, despite the grittiness of the actual event. Really, you're just spending time with the characters and getting to know who they are, where they came from, and their journey along the way. So if this all sounds good to you, I do recommend this novel to the right audience. I understand it's not going to be for everyone. If you're looking for a fast-paced thriller, you're not going to get this book to scratch that itch. But for me, I was obsessed with it. I want to reread it. I want to spend time with this book. I will definitely be reading more by this author because I was so interested in this, and I just cannot recommend it enough. My favorite backlist dark fiction book of 2024 so far, and it's going to take a pretty special book to knock it from that #1 spot. It's possible. I'm not saying it can't happen, but we'll have to watch the rest of the year and see how it goes. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know down below of the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And please let me know your favorite backlist, horror, thriller, or other dark fiction title that you have loved this year so far. I'd love to hear your recommendations. Maybe I'll get a chance to read it. And of course, I'm going to be doing a follow-up video at year end, probably in December, where I'm going to talk about my final list of favorite books for 2024. So definitely stick around, subscribe if you haven't, if that sounds good to you. And I will be doing a follow-up video very shortly, talking about my best horror and thriller books published in 2024, because that takes a whole nother video. Lots of great books coming out this year, and I can't wait to tell you more about my favorites. So if that all sounds good, hopefully I'll see you soon in another video. Thanks for watching. Talk to you in the comments, and I'll say bye.